The Jackson Park housing complex has accommodations for nearly 1,000 military families. The pleasant atmosphere, accented by scenic views and tree-lined streets, provides a cozy setting for family life. Nearby parks, an elementary school, daycare, hospital, and other facilities are part of the Navy's efforts to enhance the quality of life for its members and their families. What you may not know is that the property occupied by these facilities once served a very different function. For more than half a century, until its closure in 1959, this site housed the Puget Sound Naval Ammunition Depot, known to the local population simply as NAD. NAD was the ammunition storage facility for ships entering Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. It served this function through two world wars, the Korean conflict, and the beginnings of the Cold War. By 1959, NAD was deemed to be non-essential to the Navy, and operations there were ended. Starting in the mid-1960s, buildings at NAD were demolished to make way for Navy family housing. Since that time, nearly 1,000 family housing units have been constructed on site. Hello, I'm Alex Yoon. Today we're going to tell you about some potential hazards associated with this site. More importantly, we're going to tell you about what you should do if you encounter one of these hazards. Because of past operations conducted at NAD, there is a remote chance you could come across discarded munition materials that may remain buried on the site. Since the development of the Jackson Park housing complex, the Navy has conducted a significant amount of environmental cleanup, including projects to remove old munitions. Through this presentation and other public outreach initiatives, the Navy hopes to educate the public and ensure that residents and workers will continue to live and work in a safe environment. This commitment to safety ranks among the Navy's highest priorities. In recent years, the Navy has conducted extensive research into operations at NAD. Specifically, the goal was to locate information regarding the most probable types and the locations of discarded munitions that might be encountered on site. This research has extended all the way to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Though the records are not complete, they do offer many important details about activities conducted here. Over the operational life of NAD, many types of ordnance operations routinely took place. These included assembly, overhaul, breakdown, transport, and storage. A number of these processes involved working directly with explosive compounds, such as gunpowder and TNT. The most common types of munitions assembled or stored at NAD included everything from small arms ammunition all the way up to 16-inch naval gun rounds. Structures at NAD were divided into 5 categories based on their use: ammunition assembly and breakdown, ammunition storage, facility support, and transportation. Activities considered to present the highest likelihood of munitions being improperly discarded were assembly and breakdown, and transportation. In the early days of the depot, open burning of various materials was conducted at multiple locations along the shoreline. Burn events dealt primarily with smokeless powder. However, former employees have stated that detonators, primers, and small arms ammunition were also disposed of by burning. It's even possible that larger items may have been burned on rare occasion. While conducting pier side transfers, the loss of munitions into the bay due to mishandling would occasionally occur. Due south of the only pier that remains today stood another munitions handling pier. This older pier was demolished in the 1970s. Up to 200,000 pounds of material were handled on these piers each month during the height of operations. Periodic losses of ordnance were documented. For this reason, the waters and shoreline around these piers are thought to represent the greatest probability for harboring ordnance. So what's being done? Environmental cleanup activities at the Jackson Park and Naval Hospital sites have been ongoing since the 1980s. This work has included munitions removal, soil and groundwater remediation, and shoreline reconstruction. Work along the shoreline consisted of placement of a 1 to 2 foot layer of clean soil in the recreation areas. Boundaries of the Jackson Park housing complex and Naval Hospital Bremerton do not encompass all of the land originally included within NAD. Aside from NAD Park and NAD Marine Park, all transferred portions of the former NAD site have been developed. There were no reports of munitions being found at any of these locations during development. At its operational peak, NAD occupied 428 acres, several parcels of land totaling 163 acres on the historical southern and western boundaries of the depot have been transferred to local and state governmental entities. Other areas were sold to private parties. Environmental cleanup on these properties was overseen by the Army Corps of Engineers. No significant munitions items were recovered. An investigation and surface clearance of nearly 100% of accessible terrain within the housing areas, the beach, and the wooded portions of the site was conducted using sophisticated metal detection equipment. Items found near the surface have been removed and disposed of properly. In 2007, a comprehensive investigation of the subsurface was completed in these same areas. More than 24,000 pieces of metal were removed from some 9,000 excavations. These excavations were completed in the housing complex as well as the shoreline area to the east of the complex. Only 2 munitions items with explosive potential were found during this investigation. Some smokeless powder and small arms ammunition were also found. The overwhelming majority of the remainder of the items recovered were simply metallic scrap that presented no explosive hazard. Based on evaluation of historic operations and results of previous investigations and removal actions, the likelihood of encountering discarded munitions at the site is low. Nevertheless, additional investigation and excavation to remove 100% of the detected metal in the subsurface in the shoreline areas and specific areas of the housing complex was selected as the cleanup action. These cleanup activities will provide even greater certainty that potential explosive hazards associated with discarded munitions at the site remain low. Investigations aimed at detecting munitions in Ostrich Bay have included geophysical surveys, instrument-aided beach inspections, and diving operations. During investigation, divers recovered over 200 munitions items with explosive potential from Ostrich Bay. Appropriate cleanup measures for Ostrich Bay are currently being evaluated and will be undertaken over the next several years. Munitions are known to remain in an estimated 10-acre area under and around the pier in Ostrich Bay. In the past, grains of smokeless powder have washed up on the beach. The grains are not encased in metal and are not necessarily what we think of as powder. They may appear as black, white, or reddish-amber colored cylinders. Size varies from as small as a pencil eraser to as large as a person's thumb. These grains are typically resistant to breakdown and may still be ignitable. The Explosive Ordnance Detachment at Bangor has conducted beach surveys to look for munitions items that may have washed up or have been uncovered by way of action. Until cleanup is completed in the shoreline area east of the housing complex, because of the possibility of munitions remaining in the shoreline area and in the subtidal areas surrounding the old piers, swimming, diving, digging, and fishing are currently prohibited from Elwood Point south to the Navy property line. When cleanup actions are completed in the nearshore area, it is expected that these restrictions to digging, including shellfish harvesting, will be ended in the nearshore areas. Restrictions to access and activities in the subtidal areas will continue until cleanup has been completed in these areas. So, what are your responsibilities? Parents, please educate your children and visitors of the history of the site and the possible dangers of handling unfamiliar objects found throughout the housing area. Recognize that munitions may remain on site, both in the uplands and in the marine environment. These items will very likely appear extremely weathered and deteriorated. Just remember that even though an item may look harmless, it still has the potential to cause harm. All ground disturbing activity at the NAD site requires an excavation permit. For residents, digging in your yard is not permitted at the Jackson Park Housing Complex. Housing complex managers should be consulted with any questions regarding digging restrictions. For contractors, an excavation permit and associated instructions can be obtained from your government representative. What should you do if you find a potential discarded munition item? Residents, if you find any suspicious-looking object, take the following actions. Do not touch or approach the item. Call emergency services by dialing 911. Tell the operator where the object is, and if possible, stand by in the area to assist responders in locating the object. Contractors, if suspect munitions items are encountered, remove personnel from the immediate vicinity. Cordon off the area to prevent others from approaching. And inform your government representative of the situation. If your government representative is not available, call 911 and report the discovery. The chances you will ever encounter any of the hazards we've spoken of today are very remote, yet the possibility does exist. By obeying posted warnings and following the guidelines provided in this presentation, you can be assured that Jackson Park and Naval Hospital Bremerton areas will continue to be safe and healthy places to live and work.